Hey everyone, it's John Heath here again for Milton Rose Learning with another Let's Learn video on Frankenstein key characters. Okay, so we're going to give you a really good overview here of the characters in the novel. So we'll start with a very quick who's who of some of the biggest, some of the main characters that we need to worry about. Then we will have a look at breaking down some of these key characters for reader response and look at how a modern audience would respond to them, but also how a Regency era reader would respond to them, because obviously it's about 200 years ago, so they interpreted characters in very different ways sometimes. And then we'll look very quickly at a character arc, so some of the turning points in terms of the characterization in the novel. So yeah, so it should be a really nice lesson. So let's dive in then. So first off, we'll look at what we would call a quick kind of who's who of some of the biggest characters in this kind of novel, just so we've got a very quick grab on who they are. So first off then, let's start with the big guy. So we'll start with Victor Frankenstein. So who is he? Basically a brilliant scientist, but he's obsessed with creating life. And then he rejects his own creation. So he creates this monster and then turns his back on it, as you do. He embodies the dangers of unchecked ambition and the quest for forbidden knowledge. Okay, so naughty, naughty. He represents the tragic consequences of irresponsibility, though, and ultimately trying to play God, which cuts to the moral core of this novel. You know, that should never be done. That's the kind of the authorial intention behind it. Then we have the creature. Okay, so the creature, intelligent and sensitive, but he's feared because of obviously the way that he looks. He's kind of rejected by society because of that. He begins with compassion, with some element of humanity up to a point, but he does turn vengeful after repeated abandonment and kind of cruelty. So he symbolises the impact of societal prejudice and the need for belonging, the social need that we all have. We're all social animals, and the creature in some ways is no different there. Then we have Elizabeth Lavenza. So Victor's adopted cousin and fiancée, gentle, idealised, etc. She represents passive femininity and the emotional cost of Victor's ambition. Okay, it's very important to realise that. And her tragic death reflects the collateral damage of the male ego and scientific obsession. You know, Victor Frankenstein's obsession for kind of growing new life. Then we have Alphonse Frankenstein. Okay, so just get that in there. So Victor's caring, rational father who urges him to seek balance and emotional support. He symbolises, in my mind, traditional values, paternal authority and concern for the family honour. And he highlights how Victor's isolation cuts him off from guidance and compassion. So quite an interesting anchor-like character there. Then we have Henry Clerval, Victor's best friend. So romantic and idealistic foil to Victor's obsession with science. Henry embodies then that kind of juxtaposition, that humanism, creativity and moral warmth, which cuts against Victor Frankenstein. His murder, though, shows the reach of Victor's guilt and the innocent lives that are destroyed by Victor Frankenstein's boundless ambition. And then we have Robert Walton, ambitious Arctic explorer who frames the novel through his letters to his sister, obviously the epistolary kind of part of the form of the narrative sometimes, mirrors Victor's obsessive pursuit of knowledge and glory, and his change of heart at the end contrasts with Victor's stubbornness and suggests that redemption is possible, and that's why Robert Walton is kind of such an important character. Okay, so that's a very quick kind of who's who. But if we take it to the next level here, we've got audience response when it comes to characters. Now, it's very important to know this was written during the Regency era, so the 1800s, and they saw the world very differently to you and I, because our consciousness has evolved and society and technology has evolved, and it changes the way we look at these characters over time. So on the left, we have a Regency interpretation, and then on the right, we have a modern day interpretation of each of the main characters. So let's have a good look at this, because if you can get some of this into your essays, it would be very, very nice, and your mark will improve. So let's start with Victor Frankenstein, if we can. A Regency era reader 200 years ago, they would see Victor Frankenstein as a tragic figure consumed by unchecked ambition and symbolising the dangers of scientific hubris, arrogance, thinking that you can play God. So they would have really not liked that because they were Christian in that period, obviously. But a modern reader would look, if you look on the right, a reflection of toxic masculinity and the pressures of relentless success, even to the point of ignoring ethical concerns. He's blinded by his own desire for success, and it just kills him, doesn't it? It just kind of ends up in an absolute toxic mess. So the modern reader would look at it slightly different from a Regency perspective. Second one, if we zoom down to the creature, let's have a look at him. So on the left, you have the Regency era readership. They would see the creature as a misunderstood outcast, abandoned by his creator and then rejected by society, which is fairly standard, isn't it? But on the right, our consciousness has evolved. So we would view him as introspective, questioning his own identity, morality, and also human empathy, and it makes the creature very relatable to a modern audience because identities have been destabilized a lot now with modern life, and that resonates more, I think, with the creature. You get some more sympathetic reading now from a modern perspective. Elizabeth Lavenza, on the left, you have the Regency view. Respected for her unwavering devotion and quiet strength, and she embodied that kind of idealised femininity, that feminine passivity almost in that period. But on the right, our view might have changed a bit, so she's a symbol of emotional intelligence and restraint, highlighting the patriarchal restrictions placed on women. Now, because we've had feminist theory now for quite some time, it highlights through Elizabeth the patriarchal limitations that she was operating under. And so can you see how it changes our view of that female character? Very, very interesting to tease out in any of your essays. Alphonse Frankenstein, just there. So on the left, Regency view, well-meaning but ineffective patriarch or male figure dominator, blinded by optimism. But then on the right, modern day, he represents denial and empty ambition, failing to protect his family from destruction. You can't escape that, and he gets a much more negative interpretation in the modern day. Henry Clerval, on the left, looking at it from a Regency view, admired as a model of hard work and integrity, and it contrasts with Victor's kind of reckless pursuit of scientific knowledge. And then if we look from a modern day interpretation, we would value him for his realism. He's very humble and very compassionate. And he emphasises the importance of human connection over ambition. Never get too big for your boots. That's what a modern day interpretation might tease out in terms of Henry Clerval. And he kind of highlights that in relation to Victor Frankenstein. And then Robert Walton, on the left, we have the Regency view. An ambitious explorer, embodies the kind of admiration of bold scientific discovery, whereas on a modern day interpretation might represent the ruthless capitalist kind of ideals and pushing boundaries without moral consequences. Maybe you could kind of debate some of these readings, but nevertheless I'd say that's a very defensible one for a modern day interpretation. So you can see that the characters of Frankenstein, they change throughout history. Their interpretation changes, and you want to try and tease some of those differences out when you're writing your essays and your exams on Frankenstein. Okay, now let's wrap up with looking at a bit of a character arc and how characters change from the start to the end of the narrative, and then a really important turning point in the characterization. So at the start of the text, very interesting image there. The creature is awakening. That's like me waking up in the morning. The Creature's Awakening then. So the overview is Victor Frankenstein rejects his own creation and he's horrified by its grotesque appearance, isn't he? So the characterization at the start, this moment establishes Victor as reckless and irresponsible. He pursues scientific glory, but he can't face the consequences. So it marks the creature's tragic beginning. It foreshadows the horror that's going to come out of this. And a really good quote for you to get your head around at the start of the characterization is, I had worked hard for nearly 2 years, but now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. So a very powerful juxtaposition there that you can really tease out to kind of analyze in detail. Okay. Then we get to a real turning point, and novels are all about turning points, I find. So this was a turning point in the characterization here. The creature's encounter with the DeLacy family. So the creature secretly observes the DeLacy family, learning language, empathy, and human connection. So it humanizes the creature. So this scene highlights the creature's innate kindness and desire for acceptance. They want to be accepted into human society. But his eventual rejection reinforces his alienation, and then he gets his burning animus and hatred, and it all goes downhill from there, obviously. So a quote, I admired virtue and good feelings and loved the gentle manners of my cottagers. He's trying to be more human, and he's trying to develop those kind of human sinews of kind of empathy and comradeship, if I can put it that way. So that's a kind of real turning point for the creature, especially when they're rejected. And then at the end, we have Victor's tragic pursuit, don't we? So at the end, Victor relentlessly hunts the creature down, driven by revenge and guilt after the death of his loved ones, because the creature goes on a bit of a rampage, as we know. The characterization then, because this is a character study, this moment shows Victor is consumed by obsession. He becomes monstrous. He becomes arguably more monstrous than the creature. Some of my sharper students do say, he's the real monster in this text, actually Victor Frankenstein. And there is a case where you can argue that, most definitely. His downfall then serves as a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition, as we know. Really good quote to back that up. I was possessed by a maddening rage. I pressed on, regardless of fatigue or cold. He was just hunting this creature down. Okay, he was absolutely obsessed with the tragic end of the creature. So with that in mind, we've had a really, really good character study there of a lot of the main characters for Frankenstein, and hopefully you found that really, really useful. Do think about a Regency interpretation of them and then a modern interpretation. I think that's always really interesting. And do try and zoom in and find the turning points in the characterizations where each character kind of changes and shifts throughout the narrative. I think that's very, very important. Okay then, so don't forget, as always, to hit the like, the subscribe, tap the bell icon, you know what to do by now, and please do share it with all your friends and whatnot, and leave us any comments if you've got any comments that you want to kind of raise, or you want to kind of have a chat about the kind of novel. Please do pop them in the comments and we'll do our best to get back to you. Okay then, so it just remains to say then, until next time, hopefully you've enjoyed that video. I know we did. And then it just remains to say, obviously, thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. Take care.